Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Global Connections Television is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guests. We'd invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, if you're involved with a PBS or community access television station, or perhaps an educational institution that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you just have a website, you have a computer, you like our shows, and you would like to share them, please feel free to do so. Global Connections Television is provided as a public service at no cost to help us better understand international issues and how they impact our lives. Today we're going to take a look at probably what is the number one international issue, number one crisis to many people, to many scientists, and that is the climate change crisis. My guest is someone who's written extensively on this and is very knowledgeable. My guest today is Kris O'Daniel. Ms. O'Daniel is a native of Denmark. She is an environmentalist, dairy scientist, and a journalist with great interest in how to transform the world on clean energy. Kris O'Daniel, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you very much, Bill. I look forward.
I appreciate you being with me, and you've got a lot of good information for us. You know, we hear this term climate change, and now we're hearing climate change crisis. It's no longer just climate change. It is based on scientific reports, which are getting more and more dour every day. How do you briefly define climate change or climate change crisis?
Right, yeah, this is important. So when we record significant changes over a long extended period of time in, say, temperature increase or water flows, we call that a climate change. And it becomes a crisis when we do not have control over this. The cause has been discussed, and deniers will say it's not necessarily proven to be caused by humans, but it don't really matter. We do know that for the last 50 years or so, we have seen a much higher increase in temperature than previous. And over the last 50 years as well, we have doubled our emissions. That means that what is happening actually is that we, because of our dependency of fossil fuels, we have emitting gases like carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and ozone, etc., vapors that are holding back or actually instead of reflecting, they are absorbing solar light and turning it into heat. So we have covered our planet in a blanket of a heat belt, additional heat belt. And I think people are somewhat remote to understand that presently we are just about 1 centigrade above pre-industrial level. It doesn't sound very much, but all those who also are recording biodiversity, which is many things, whether it's from little organisms to how many elephants and so on, will also tell you of very huge changes in our ecosystems.
And we see that some carbon is good to have in the atmosphere. It's good for development of everything, trees, plants, species, everything, but too much is what we're talking about now. And of course, the big carbon footprints are caused primarily by the fossil fuels, by coal, oil, and gas. And there are other items that are involved in that, but those are the principal ones that are creating this situation. And of course, of the studies we've seen that have come out from the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which was set up in 1988, they've done 5 or 6 major studies. We see that there's an acceleration of this carbon footprint, and it's causing the glaciers to melt, causing the seas to rise, causing desertification to take place. Almost every aspect is being affected. Droughts are being created. So we really have a crisis on our hands. Given that the state of affairs is getting more challenging and more demanding, what do you see as some of the impediments to us understanding this problem? How do you view that?
Yeah, I think that again, people feel that it's hard to understand how 1 centigrade, or even when we are saying that it's dramatic when it becomes 1.5%, which is predicted by 2050 if we don't do changes to how we produce energy. People have difficulty to understand that, but if we compare to how the planet was originally designed and how we would be able to absorb using natural forests or all vegetations would basically carbon capture or transform, take CO2 out of the air and bring it down into the soil as carbon, which is needed for microorganisms. People might relate better to that, but they do follow that and understand that we have a proven additional emissions. As I said, we have 50% increase, and we need to change that. It's recommended by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change to limit about 45% of all emissions has to be cut by 2030 and carbon zero by 2050 to prevent further increase in temperatures. People probably are more aware of what they see as weather changes, and they are clearly reacting to hurricanes when it comes close by. And they are also starting to sense that the amount of dollar in this country, we have spent about $90-some billion last year cleaning up after natural catastrophes. They start to relate that to how much our natural deficit is, and they start to understand that we have to prevent rather than just clean up.
We're going to get into that in a few minutes, because we see the expenses are going up and up. We see virtually almost every city that borders a river or let's say near the ocean, let's put it like that. They're doing studies, Miami, New York, you can go all around the world and find every year they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars to figure out how they're going to keep the ocean out of coming into their subway system, and that's a major problem. But let's, for the moment, I just want to talk a little bit about the conferences very briefly that have been held and have brought the players together on this. Thousands of groups have been involved in this. You mentioned the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It says 97% of the scientists say that a large part of this, a vast part of the warming of the planet is caused by humans. That the evidence seems to be there. The studies are in. And of course, the United Nations over the years has focused on this through their conferences and bringing all 193 countries of the world together to focus on. Now, I won't go through all those that have been held up to this point, but just recently, in early September or mid-September, at the UN, they had a conference, a one-day conference, a very brief one, at the Secretary General Antonio Guterres brought together the key players around the world and asked them to talk about not the problem. We know the problem. The question is, what are you doing and what are you going to do? And there was one that came up right after that, the C40 World Mayors Summit that was held in your native country, in Copenhagen, Denmark. And that was a very substantive conference. Let's talk about some of the recommendations that they came up with and to see if we can come up with some solutions on that they proposed, maybe some ideas you have on how we can deal with this problem and slow down this rapid warming of the planet. And I think out of the last 6 years, 5 of them have been the hottest in recorded history since we've been keeping records. But one of the recommendations was the power of public pressure and the role of businesses and the private sector. What role can they play in this? Yeah,
this is where we really are benefiting from what United Nations leadership has done. Being diplomatic, you would say they have been reinforcing diplomacy, and interestingly enough, I sense they have had more success reaching out to businesses and to investors who really understand the language spoken, that this is a threat. They reaching out to cities, as you mentioned, or mayors, is a very smart thing to do. It has a more direct line of communication. It is very much needed. They know that we need action now, as you said. Mm-hmm. So the closer to where action can be decided, the better. And mayors are, in some of the larger cities, are certainly rather powerful as well and have a very good connection, more direct also with business sectors. And political leadership is, of course, so important, but they are very often not wanting to. Mm-hmm. They are the one who have decided how to spend subsidies to fossil fuel industry, but they also want to decide not to do that anymore. So we must have political leadership in as well. In Europe, I have experienced how many companies are using United Nations sustainability goals as a guideline. They have taken it often. Industries generally take things once they are motivated, which because they look at the line,
the bottom line.
The bottom line.
What's the profit?
So
right,
what's
yes.
the profit? But also, if there is no planet anymore, there is not going to be any profit. So they are much closer to the real world actually than political leaders. Not to say that some large corporations are not very political, but we do see that it is very smart to go more directly to leadership of companies, of cities. Also on that line, right now, since the last 50 years again, the population have doubled, and within the next, or I think it's predicted to about 2050, we'll see most likely another almost doubling of the population. And also we know that about half of the population right now live in cities, are going towards cities, and the major, I think something like 70% of emissions are created or found in cities or happens in the cities because of the bigger population and energy demand.
That's very true. You mentioned several things that are so important. One, population is, right now we're at 7.6 billion people on the planet, and by 2050 we're going to be at at least 9.5. And that's going to put more pressure on the resources, going to create more contamination, more air pollution. People want more cars, they want more refrigerators, sure, which is natural, which is normal, and those are the problems. But the cities are really the key to a large degree because they produce most of the pollution right now. But given, if they can implement some energy efficient approaches to solar panels or what have you, get off of coal, oil, and gas as fast as possible, because that's what's causing most of our problems. But try to convert to clean energy, to green energy. The cities will have, as you mentioned, 70% of the people in the world will be living in an urban area, large urban area, by 2050. But what can they do in the cities to become more efficient?
Well, I think that it is generally people in cities are more aware of that there is a certain pressure, I would say. So they are probably the one who are more ready to change. We are facing a world where we have to not only wean ourselves from fossil fuels, but change certain habits, because one thing is to create more or generate clean energy. Another way is to do it. Another thing is to do it sustainably. I think people in cities are leading in a way. They are more aware of what is organic food, what is healthy habits, but they also have a higher desire probably to do things better for the future. That is a general statement to say. So they would probably be more helpful. There's going to be a cost. Generally, the population in cities, in healthy cities, also have a better income. Now all that is very complicated, and but again we have to start with understanding and awareness, I believe. We will in cities we can benefit from a renewable energy point of view. You can benefit that in a way people are living closer, and we can in many places use what we call distributed energy, which means that we produce energy where, or generate energy where it is distributed. We need to introduce that way more than we are doing now, instead of bringing in electricity from far away. If we later on are going into the different renewable options, still we can imagine that cities are built more towards a future, including solar, rooftop solar as an example, or they will be more independent on energy supply and storage. It's just a matter of thinking different. Cities will I think have a better motivation for that.
They're going to have to, and of course they can use mass transit, bicycles. Bicycles are very popular. Denmark,
Oh yeah.
Copenhagen, I think, is one of the bicycle capitals of the world.
It is, right?
Seems like everybody bicycles, but there are things that can be done that in urban areas and to create buildings. But before, we were down to about 10 minutes, so we better move into the energy efficiency. What do you see as far as the green energies, the use of electric vehicles, things like that, which
Sure.
there is a demand right now for electric vehicles. But the
Sure.
problem is they don't have the charging stations around the country.
Yeah.
So you can't go very far away and not get a charge. And so that's the problem.
Yeah, sure. But we have to go towards replacing all our transform all our energy needs to being more electrified, which is easy to say and very difficult to do. There are, apart from within renewable, we also have hydrogen electrolyzers, which is used. I think Danish buses have for years been going on hydrogen, which is totally clean as far as I know, and efficient. So in cities with good leadership, you can perfect things a little bit better and rationalize, do things better that way. It takes all those new infrastructure takes, of course, a ton of money. So that a lot of it boils down to. That's why it has to be very, very coordinated, and that's why we do need political influence. But it is possible, and we see already countries like Norway, of all new cars, I think 60% is electrified cars. We have in a short time also developed batteries. They still need way more development, but it is certainly coming. A lot of all this have to do with that you buy more, then prices are coming down.
And that's very important. And so many of these countries, excuse me, are really doing well. Costa Rica just came out and said within the next few years they're going to be 99% totally fossil fuel free.
Yeah.
Of course, they have a lot of hydro energy. They're very fortunate to have that. Germany is moving very aggressively. Your country, Denmark, has done a remarkable job of getting away from coal, less oil and less gas, and moving into these clean energy areas. So there are some models out there. There are prototypes that we can use and that we need to start focusing on, because the situation is getting worse and worse, and it's going to be more costly, as you mentioned, for the business sector, for the government expenditures, if we don't get a handle on this. And insurance companies, I don't know how they're going to be able to withstand all of the claims that they're going to have because of forest fires, because of flooding, because of all these problems. And it's just every year they keep coming on, but at a stronger rate. So
Sure. That is very important. We need to get away from spending all the funds on cleaning up and to prevent. Again, I think the understanding for prevention and that our environment is as important as producing profit, putting that in stockholders' pocket. That is a huge change we have to get into. When you mentioned the 3 different countries there, they they have all very different characteristics geographically, weather-related, what manufacturing, degree of manufacturing they have. All those natural resources provide different challenges for each country. And yes, they have, at Costa Rica, they also have, apart from waterfalls, they have volcanic eruptions, I think it's called, so they can provide geothermal energy as well, just like in Iceland. Germany is, like China, is heavy manufacturers for the rest of the world. So those two countries have huge challenges. And I would like to just bring in China, that give them credit. They have certainly shown, I think it was something like $125 billion. They were investing in renewable energy, where America, United States only is about 1/3 of that. China is actually not emitting per capita as much as United States. If you look at per capita carbon dioxide emitting, United States is about 16 metric ton per capita. China is only about 5.5. And in that category with China is Germany and European Union, whereas Australia and Canada and Saudi Arabia is in the same level as United States. So when you point that out per capita, people understand that a little bit better. Yeah.
They certainly do. And you mentioned something earlier too, I don't want to forget about. One of the reasons, we were talking about impediments, and one of the main impediments to people better understanding this is because of a lot of the misinformation that the fossil fuel industry puts out, coal, oil, and gas. ExxonMobil has been funding fake scientists for years to put out a lot of misinformation about how bad climate change really is. These companies also are getting a lot of subsidies from governments in the United States and around the world. I think I saw a figure where like the U.S. government puts up $65 billion a year or something like that to subsidize these three areas. What would happen if they moved a large part of them, moved all of those subsidies into clean energy, where that's where the jobs are today? They're being created in the solar, 350,000 new jobs. What would happen if they moved all those subsidies into developing clean energy, to developing the electric cars and that type of thing?
Well, that's what we have to do simply. And taking away 65 billion will tell them not to. They can't go on at all without that. So that in itself, taking away is a huge gain. It'll only be it's still a small part of what is needed. We need way more. That's where we have to coordinate these efforts. And I think I would like to also just mention that we cannot forget that we are the planet is a living place, and when we have reduced the positive effect of forest to only about 1/4 or so, taking out carbon dioxide, we are unbalancing this world, and that's where we have to really understand that we are on a planet, and we have to bring back the balance. We easily understand that the elements of water, water, air, fire, and soil, we are unbalancing those 4 elements, and I think people will understand that.
Well, Kris, the hardest question, the last minute we have, are we heading towards a 6th extinction? We've had 5 extinctions that have wiped out most of the living organisms on planet Earth over the last billions of years. Are we heading for the 6th one?
Yes, I believe we are on the way if we don't get our acts together. It's a very serious thing. Extinction, people always think it's something like a fast execution. It's going to be slow, but we have to understand that all the crises we are facing right now is the good outlook could be to say that if we solve the climate change or the climate crisis, we also will solve the human crisis and sort of the economic crisis we are going into. So if we get the eyes open for that it's all connected, then I think we have a chance.
Those are positive, optimistic words, and I hope you're right. I think you're right, but we are going to have to do it, and we're going to have to focus more on it. More and more people are becoming aware of the problem every day. All the countries of the world except the United States are in the United Nations Paris Climate Change Agreement. It's very important that we get back in it. It's very important that we work as a leader in this area and to overcome it, because if we don't, we have no planet B. There is no backup. And if we lose this one, then it's just going to be dire consequences. But Kris O'Daniel, I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.